Welcome to the Military Justice Today podcast with your host, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams, covering the full range of military law topics from all branches of the armed forces. Today's episode is made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla Williams. And now, let's welcome the hosts of the show, Rob and Mickey.
All right, everybody, here we go. Another episode of Military Justice Today. I'm Matt Starosiak, stepping in momentarily for the real host of the show, and we've got both of them in the studio today, Robert Capovilla, Mickey Williams, and we're also joined by Dan Higgins. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Matt.
Nice to see everybody today. It's not very often that we're all in the studio together.
Not very often, but hey, let's make the most of it.
Mickey, you're usually in the gym when we're recording or in a court-martial.
Well, listen, there are things that I set as priorities, and one of them is trial. The other is my physique.
Getting the lift in.
Yeah, man.
Well, it's great to be with you guys. We have a phenomenal episode today. I think by far this is the one that I've been most excited about because we've got a special guest, Mr. John Correia from Active Self-Protection. John, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you just fine. How about you guys? Can you hear me?
We can hear you great. I think you're calling in from sunny Arizona today, so we appreciate you joining us early. I have been a big fan of yours for many years, probably 10 years, I would think, and I'm not alone. Your main YouTube channel has over 3.4 million subscribers. You've got almost 4,000 videos on that channel alone, and that's not the only content that you push out there. You've got almost 2 billion views again on that channel alone. So pretty amazing. And you've got a second channel and a podcast, and you do all kinds of great things. We could probably spend an hour talking about your credentials and your background. You just do a phenomenal job producing content, educating folks, and really displaying an awesome commitment to keeping people safe. And so we appreciate the work that you do and for you agreeing to spend some time with us, sir.
Oh, man, I appreciate you guys having me on. It's a crazy thing. I hear you say that stuff and I go, wow, is that really true? It doesn't feel like it. I just feel like a guy working out of his garage. It's not. It's a home office now. But, I feel like, how did all this happen? And where am I? Yeah. And how did I get in this? So, yeah, I'm grateful to be where I am, from the life of a junior enlisted squid to here.
Yeah, and you deserve it. You really do deserve it, because it takes a lot of work to build that kind of following, and you're putting out quality material if you're able to do it. I actually watched one of your interviews from about 9 years ago, and they had referenced your number of followers or subscribers, and it was 100,000. And back then that was pretty cool. It was like, wow, yeah, 100,000, and to see where you're at today is phenomenal. Yeah,
it's weird.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's an odd thing. YouTube celebrity is actual celebrity in 2024. So, being out and about these days, and people, it's not uncommon for somebody to come up and say hi and want to take a selfie. And, it just had it happen at lunch the other day. And so it's an odd thing. It's super weird, that's for sure, but it's cool. It's a great way to make a living.
Well, and it's for the right reasons. I mean, what you're doing, you're known for something that's really, really good as opposed to the opposite. So, I saw a part of your website bio I thought had a really good paragraph kind of summarizing your background and credentials. We don't read much on this show, but I'd like to read that because I think it's a good summary. And then we're just going to pepper you with questions about why you do what you do, and maybe we'll get into some specifics on self-defense and even some things that these guys are working on in their court-martial and separation board work. But John is a nationally recognized subject matter expert in private citizen, defensive encounters and law enforcement use of force, a master firearms instructor, martial artist, court-admitted expert witness, and teacher of teachers whose passion is to help people from all walks of life protect themselves and their loved ones from criminal violence. And I'll add 2 other real important things as well. One is you're a veteran, and you served our country for more than 7 years in the Navy. And something that's near and dear to the guys in this room, you're a staunch advocate for community service and giving back. And I hope to talk a little bit about the Flint Hills Foster Teen Camp in our episode today. So just a great background. Did I leave anything out? Anything of interest?
Well, that's a lot. You know, it feels like I've lived an awful lot of life in 48 years. So yeah, I made hot water the hard way in Uncle Sam's Canoe Club for 7 years, and enjoyed that job immensely. Everybody knows. I always say I really look back fondly at my time in the military, and I'm really glad I don't do it today. So yeah, did that. Got out of the Navy at the end of '02, so I actually got 2 I Saw It on CNN awards, 2 National Defense Medals. And then I was actually a vocational pastor for 14 years as well, taught at the graduate and undergraduate level as an adjunct for 9 years, and then started the company. Really, I started active self-protection because my true core competency is teaching, and I've gotten into self-defense, empty-handed skills, firearms, and then just to write off ammo, figured if I had a business teaching other people how to do it, I had to do it well, and so I could write off classes. So that's where the company started, and here we are today, and it's my solo occupation. It's one of those things that I never expected to do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us end up sometimes doing what we don't expect, and I'd like to really ask that as the first question of the podcast is, where does that passion come from? Were you kind of a firearms enthusiast? Did it come from your time in the military? Did you have a defensive encounter that kind of turned you on to it? Where did the passion to kind of do it full time and to do it at a super high level come from you?
So I grew up hunting a little bit. I hunted with my grandpa a little bit when I was a kid. Was around some firearms, but not a ton. It wasn't like a passion or whatever. And you guys know when you're in the service, you can't really own firearms. I mean, you can, but it's such a pain when you're transferring from base to base and state to state, and every base has different rules, and you don't know what your living situation is going to be. So it was none of that in the Navy. And again, I see you guys were Rangers and stuff like that, and you got to actually, carry rifles around and shoot them and stuff. We didn't do any of that stuff in the Navy. If it came down to that in the Navy, we were in trouble. That's what we had Marines for.
That's right.
So it wasn't until I got out, and then I started working in retail while I was going to graduate school. So I earned a Master's of Divinity in Biblical Communication, and that's a 96 credit hour master's degree. It's a bonkers long degree.
Wow.
And and so I was working in retail management, actually running of all things a video game store. And the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 came out, and managers were getting hurt for them. Well, not me. I never got mugged or anything like that, but managers were getting mugged for them because people were reselling them on eBay and stuff. This is before social media was really, really big. But, and so I was like, man, not me. That's not happening. About that time, right in that same time, my son, we were, at the time, pretty enthusiastic homeschoolers. And my son was a real little guy. He's a grown man now, but he got into, karate as his extracurricular activity at the community center as his, PE time. So he coaxed me into getting into it with him. And so I started taking some empty-handed skills, some martial arts. And at that time, because of the threat of getting mugged, here in Arizona back then, we weren't constitutional carry like we are now, but we were shall issue CCW. And so I went down and got my CCW, and I bought a handgun and a holster, some ammo, and I carried it for a while, kind of as a lucky rabbit's foot, to be honest with you. Like, honestly, I think most people who carry a firearm for personal protection, I honor that. I believe in the Second Amendment, but most people aren't very good with their guns.
Yeah,
if you ever go to a public range, and you go, my God, I need a ballistic vest and to get out of here. But so I did that for a couple of years, and then I got serious about it because I realized, man, if I'm going to carry this thing around, I better be good with it. So I started training. That got expensive. And, the training, really the first passion was martial arts. The true passion was empty-handed skills. I've been doing that now for 18 years. I've earned a second-degree black belt in a derivative of Kempo. It's a standing striking art. And so the firearms piece kind of came secondarily to that, but I got pretty good at it. So I started teaching some classes in that. And really, I think the passion comes just like everywhere else in my life. I have a passion as an educator. My true heart is to teach people to better their lives. And I did that for 14 years as a pastor. I did it as a professor. And then in this realm of self-defense, there was so much like just misinformation, mythology, no crap, there I was stories. And then so I had somebody send me a video of a real life self-defense encounter somebody got in, and I was like, whoa, Like that was real. It was a guy murdering his baby mama.
Yeah.
And just shaking her with a knife. And it scared me to death. And so I literally put it on my BlackBerry Storm. That'll tell you when this was. And took it to martial arts class that night and was like, talked to my teacher. And I was like, man, he's a good friend. Lawrence Robinson's his name. And I said, Lawrence, I don't know what to do in this kind of attack. And he said, hey, well, why don't we workshop that problem on the mats tonight? Let's just get the rubber knives out and let's just attack each other that way and see what we can find. Cool. We did for a couple of hours. Felt much better at the end. I mean, somebody attacking you with a knife is the worst day of your life.
Yeah.
But at least I felt like I had some vocabulary, you know?
Sure.
And so then I went home and I was like, I remember sitting in my car after that class and before I even drove home, I was like, wow, that was pretty cool. We took what really happened to somebody that was caught on video and we used it to make our training better. We used it to get better at our martial arts in a very evidence-based way. And so I went home and put it on the company Facebook page. I'd started a company Facebook page because as a pastor, talking about gun stuff and self-defense had frustrated some of the blue-haired ladies at church. And so I started a company page just to get away from the frustration from the blue-haired ladies. You know, that's their right. I get it. You know what I mean? You don't necessarily want your pastor talking about God and everything. And so, you know, I was like, hey, if you want that content, come over here to the company page. And so started posting stuff over there and it went nuts.
Well, and hopefully we're going to get to talk about that issue of religion and spirituality, because these guys get that question a lot, which is, you know, how do you defend folks that are accused of real serious crimes? And so I hope to touch on that later on in the episode. But, you know, and I probably should have said this at the beginning, a large part of what you do, and I don't want to say it's everything because you do a lot more than that, but a large part of what you do is analysis of a defensive encounter video each day, and you might even do multiple ones on both of the channels. But you do a real good job at it, and one of the things that I like about your stuff the most is it is very, very objective, and you're not coming at it with an agenda or some bias. You know, you really talk about what happened. You're not trying to be a tough guy. There's a lot of folks out there that talk about self-defense on the web, and you know they want to be the tough guy, and I would do this, that. And you're not afraid to criticize. I know you're a big advocate of the law enforcement professionals, and a lot of times you talk about what a great job they do, but you're not afraid to say, hey, you know what, you came in a little strong, or you might have handled this differently. And I really think that's a lot of what makes your stuff so attractive and popular among the folks that follow you.
Well, I appreciate that. We really try to just call balls and strikes, you know, and to say I'm going to say a lot of this is due. We tried very hard at this. My chief marketing officer, his name is Neil Widener. He's a master firearms instructor as well. He's my best friend. And he, you know, he was very staunch. He's like, John, if we're making the badge cams in particular, we do 2 badge cams a week and 5 private citizen encounters. And we know that those badge cams are used in police academies. We know they're used by patrol sergeants. We know that they're used by SWAT teams. We know that they're used by post boards. I know at least 2 state post boards that use them, 1 national post board. I think last count I had was something like 40 police academies that I'm aware of use them. Hundreds and hundreds of patrol sergeants show them to their patrol cops. So, and Neil was like, well, if we're making these videos to tell private citizens about how hard the job of law enforcement is, that's one thing. But if we're making them to train cops to be better, then we have to do that to the high standard instead of excusing when things don't go right.
Yeah.
And that really struck me. So we try to maintain both of those. You know, I'm a force science analyst and certified by the Force Science Institute, and you know, human performance is a real thing. You can't ask a fish to fly. You know, you can't ask a human to do things humans are not capable of doing.
Sure.
But on the other hand, you can say, hey, we have a high level of training so that we make good decisions under stress. And if you can't make good decisions, this is one of those professions that you've got to make good decisions.
Yeah.
It's actually something I really think that Chris Rock got right, of all people, in a comedy routine. Is, you know, he said, well, there's a few bad apples. He goes, but this is like airline pilots, okay? We can't have a few bad apples in the airline pilots industry. You know, you got to get this one right every time.
Yeah, that's right.
And they do, you know, and so same thing. And cops do. They get it right again and again and again and again. A few, and those are the ones that make the national news, of course, are the ones that don't go right.
That's right.
And we use those for training. When I was in the Navy, so I worked in nuclear reactors in the Navy. And if ever we had, this is where I learned this. Whenever there was a problem on a naval nuclear reactor, whenever we had, an operational problem, something that shut a reactor down, something that caused a problem, we would literally take everybody off watch, do a full debrief, replace the watch, take everyone on debrief, full debrief. What happened? Did we have an equipment failure? Did we have a policy procedure failure? Did we have a personnel failure? What happened? Sometimes people get, certifications yanked. Hey man, you got to go back and requalify on that because clearly you weren't up to standards on that today. And then that would be written up and sent to every reactor in the fleet.
Yep.
Every ship in the Navy gets a full copy of that and is required to read it and to acknowledge it. And so we don't propagate errors. And that's what my goal is with active self-protection. Don't propagate errors. Do the best thing all the time because lives are at stake.
Yeah, and it's a constant striving for improvement. I'm sure that you feel like there's always things that you can improve on, and no matter how many videos you post and cover the same thing, there's always an opportunity to do something maybe slightly different. And I would assume you're still learning stuff each and every day in the work that you do. How often are you surprised by something that you see in your work? I would assume in a lot of respects you've seen just about everything these days: carjackings, robberies, sexual assaults. It runs the whole gamut. But how often are you surprised by something you see, or you're not sure exactly what direction you want to take it? Is that super rare at this point for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, we've seen a lot. I've probably analyzed around 50,000 gunfights at this point. So, the patterns that emerge are pretty regular, but every once in a while, I actually really enjoy when something shows up out of the blue. Or something really weird happens because those are novel, and you go,
Sure.
Wow. Now we always try to warn people that, hey, this was really novel. This is the first time I've ever seen this. So don't take this as, here's the thing I need to be prepared for because this is kind of a unicorn.
Yeah.
But the unicorns are kind of fun and they happen every once and again. A quick example is I always step on toes in the defensive space because I tell people that as a private citizen, not as a cop, very different as a cop, but as a private citizen, you'll never use a reload for your handgun. If you carry a handgun for personal protection, whatever's in the gun is what you get to fight with. And people get frustrated about that because most of us have been trained by old cops who are taught to carry, 11D4 reloads, and that's a different mission in a different world. Well, here about 4 months ago, I saw my very first time I have ever seen a private citizen reload and use rounds from that reload in a real gunfight. And there's a couple big asterisks on it. It was in Pakistan, and the guy was carrying a gun with a half full magazine because that's their culture there because they worry about springs wearing out. And then he should have ran away, but instead he went and put a couple anchor shots into guys, which probably would get him hemmed up here in the United States.
That's right.
But in Pakistan, they gave him a medal.
Yeah.
And so, I'm like, okay, so don't do that. And I wouldn't recommend any of that in the US, but hey, it worked for him. So, but I mean, I saw that and instead of going, oh no, I can't say that anymore, I was like, holy crud, I can't say that anymore. Look at that. It actually happened. I have one when somebody wants to know, has there ever been a reload? There it is. There's the actual reload. I've actually seen one. So now it's 50,001.
And I think you do a good job of talking about the exception to the rule. I think a lot of times I've watched your videos, and when somebody uses a firearm as kind of a bludgeoning tool or as a hammer or weapon, you say, they're unlikely to use it, but you always put a qualifier in there and a disclaimer. It's not always, it's
right.
It's less likely for them to do this based on all the stuff that I've seen, but it can happen. It's an unpredictable space that you work in.
Yeah, and I mean, so you guys are lawyers. You understand this, right? This is the same thing when I say in court, and somebody's like, well, John, in court, the jury would clearly acquit this person of this. And I go, well, hopefully, but if you've never stood in front of a jury, I can't tell you what a jury's going to do. It's a 600-year-old dragon that's got an IQ of 1,200, and I don't know what it's interested in.
That is exactly exactly right. That is
that's
exactly
how I describe
right.
it now. I tell people a jury is a 600, they got 600 years of life experience, but one mind. They have to have one mind. So it's a 600-year-old dragon with 1,200 years of life experience. And I'm crunchy and I taste good with ketchup. And so the answer is not to mess with it if you don't have to.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe a jury. I have never heard that before, but it's a great way to describe it. And speaking of, if I don't let these guys in here to pepper you with some questions, they're gonna drag me out. But I want to kind of launch into some of their space with one additional, and then I'll take a step back. These guys do a lot of work with respect to the presumption of innocence because they handle real sensitive cases where folks tend to make their minds up early. They see a video, they read text messages, they hear a story from somebody else. And so these guys as defense attorneys are constantly fighting that battle of, wait a second, let's take a step back and see what actually happened. We just did a full podcast this morning with a former client who, they were ready to throw the book at him and lock him away forever. And once they started digging into things, they saw that it wasn't exactly what it appeared to be. And I think that has a lot of crossover to what you do. You're looking at these videos saying, well, wait a second, he was shot in the back, but the decision to take that shot, to fire that weapon came, a second or two before that. Can you talk a little bit about the idea that things aren't always what they appear to be and how you really have to take a step back to get things right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in every arena. Okay, so one of my favorite books is a book by a guy named Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind. Haidt is the author's name. And in that book, he's a moral psychologist who studied people across cultures and how we make moral decisions. And his thing is that we all make decisions intuitively, and then we use strategic reasoning later to justify that decision. And the whole series of the first third of the book is about that. Really, really great book. And just like that, somebody sees something and you guys know this again, a jury looks at a defendant and decides, is that a good person or not? Pretty quick. They make a pretty snap decision on that. And that will color what they think about that defendant from there. And so, one of the things that I always tell folks is, listen, if we want to make the best decision, we have to control that by making sure that what we have first thought was true and being willing to be wrong. So in Haidt's analogy, he says that our decision making is like an elephant with a rider, and our intuition is the elephant and our strategic reasoning is the rider. And when that elephant heads off in one direction, it's going in that direction a while. But eventually, if we're conscientious, that strategic reasoning and understanding and logic can steer the elephant to a better direction because the elephant can be a little impulsive. So, I tell folks, video is great, but it doesn't tell us the whole story. It doesn't tell us what was going on in the person's mind. It doesn't tell us what they see, because human vision and human cognition is not the same as a, high definition screen. Like, we can't see like that. We can't process like that. We can't think like that. Also, there's plenty of stuff that the video doesn't catch. And so while it gives us a lot, it really tells us a whole bunch about things. It doesn't tell us everything. There was a recent video that just got put out on the channels. I don't think it's actually made it to YouTube yet. It's in our app right now. That it will in the next day or two, of a road rage incident that ends with a man getting shot. And for most of the social media posting, all that is there is this maybe 6 or 7 second interaction that he gets out with a gun in his hand, walks up to a window, kind of hits the door of the car with his gun, and then the guy shoots him 3 times. Well, what you don't see is, and what we were able to find over a little bit more digging, was a whole bunch of video of the beginning of the road rage incident and how it started and what the issues were that came up. Didn't really change a whole lot of who was right and who was wrong in the whole issue, but it did add a lot of context and a lot of texture, as it were. So, it's one of the things, like I always tell folks, I don't do breaking news. So one will come out real fast and I hate knee-jerk reactions. Because of that, the hot takes, as it were, are seldom the best takes. It's the same reason that I kind of developed, or at least I've pushed out into the world what I call the 72-hour rule, so that after any kind of significant controversy, any kind of, like a mass killing or something, the most recent one that everybody was talking about for a couple of days was the attempted assassination on Donald Trump. And everybody was asking me my opinion on it. And my answer for 72 hours was 72-hour rule. We don't know what the heck happened. We don't know who that was. We don't know what the issues are. In 72 hours, we'll know more. Until then, just let it be. The news stories are going to be wrong. There's going to be misinformation. There's going to be, all kinds of hot takes that are going to not hold up. Just chill for 72 hours, and then we'll kind of have some better understanding of things. And I think that fuller context and fuller picture keeps the outrage machine at bay. It keeps us more centered personally, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, mentally, and just as good for everybody. So that's what I try to do to bring a fuller picture. And that's whether I'm educating on YouTube or I'm standing in front of a jury.
So, John, one of the things that you said that really caught my attention was about how people will decide early whether or not they like your point of view, or in our line of work, whether they like your client. And in fact, as you can imagine, we've done a lot of studying on the literature on jury persuasion. And what the stats actually show is that anywhere from about 82 to about 87% of jurors in criminal cases make their minds up after opening statement who they're going to root for, and the studies show only about 5 to 7% of those folks will change their mind by the end of the trial. So what we tell our guys here when it comes to litigation is we kind of buck the system where popular culture wants you to think the closing argument is where you win your cases, and we tell our guys all the time, win the opening statement and you will put yourself in a position to be successful. So my question for you is you review material where the evidence may initially show that one person was the aggressor or one person was wrong, and then you're tasked at times with explaining the other viewpoint or showing the complexities of the case. As a teacher, talk to me a little bit about some of those persuasion tactics or techniques that you use. I mean, how do you go about in cases where you think that the popular culture view is incorrect? How do you go about explaining that to your listeners? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think sometimes what you have to do with folks is, I think sometimes we get lost in the weeds, and I've seen it plenty of expert witnesses or educators, and they may be radically intelligent, and they may have the facts, but they come off as arrogant. They come off as, better than you, or let me show you what really is happening, you rube. And I think that insulting someone's intelligence never helps them and never gets somebody on your side. You win people, not arguments. And so when I'm, again, if I'm doing expert witness work, you guys are way more educated than most about this, but I've talked to many an attorney that said, listen, man, you're not trying to win an argument. You're trying to win a juror is what you're trying to win. You're trying to win jurors to your way of thinking. And so the argument, you can win the argument and lose the trial. And that's as simple as it gets. And so when we want to talk to people, we want to relate to them as people and then educate them and show them why what we're talking about makes sense to them. So when I go in there with an unpopular thing, I recently had a case out in New Mexico, with a use of force use of deadly force. And to say, okay, well, I always tell people, listen, when you call an expert witness, it's a mess. You're never going to call an expert witness when it's an easy case, right? And so I get to show up to just the cases that are a mess. So, here, hey, I know everybody, you see this other part here that's later on, and you think, wow, that really colors this. But I want to help you. Let's isolate this first, and this other part, keep that at bay. That's a separate issue you need to discuss. But this particular issue, let's look at what the facts are here. And then, when I always tell folks, like jurors in particular, I love standing in front of a jury, sitting usually in front of a jury and saying, listen, here's my role. The defense attorney and the prosecutor are like, we're looking at this like a baseball game. They're the pitcher and batter. They're the adversaries that are going and trying to win here. So the judge is the administrator. The judge makes sure that the rules are followed. I said, what I'm doing here for you is I am simply describing to you the size of the strike zone. I am telling you what the balls and strikes, the parameters of each one are. And then you get to decide, your mission is to say, was that pitch a ball or a strike based on the rules that we have? So let me just tell you what the strike zone looks like. And so that to me respects their place in the world. They got to make that decision, and respects my place as an educator, and then says, hey, listen, I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to help you. And I'm here to be a resource for you and an encouragement to you, and I'm grateful for your job. And I do try to do that on YouTube too, to say, hey, I always tell folks, I'm not going to be at your gunfight, and you're not going to be at mine. So, and I'm not going to do the prison time if you do something wrong. So my goal is not to berate you. My goal is to educate you. So then that way you make the best decisions on that day so that you can stay away from this 600-year-old dragon.
You know, John, you mentioned early on that, you know, one of the reasons you got into this is situations where you have somebody who is potentially armed with a knife or a gun, you know, and, you know, you're unarmed, right? And so going in there to class to kind of train to, you know, maybe disarm someone or defend yourself when someone does have a weapon. And, you know, I think that what we're seeing here in a lot of our cases, at least Mickey and I, you know, over the last 12 months or so, with some of these self-defense cases, is kind of the inverse, right? Our guy has a weapon, and so it's a question of escalation of force, right? When is it appropriate, if it is a fist fight, to then use a weapon to defend yourself? Do you have some experience, you know, teaching that as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, we talk about this all the time. So, and the standard is it's very clear, but it's also a little ambiguous that people get frustrated with, that if I am reasonably at risk of death or great bodily injury, then I have the right to stop that risk using deadly force.
Right.
But only if I am reasonably at risk of death or great bodily injury. Now, here's where all of the squishing has come in. What is reasonably at risk? So, against an unarmed person, my standard as a 48-year-old, relatively fit, highly trained martial artist, and what would represent a risk to me is very different than, say, a 75-year-old woman with arthritic hips.
Exactly.
And, you know, and so our standard is the same, but what constitutes that risk is vastly different. So, you know, you can always conjure up, you know, demons to fight. But one of the things I say is, listen, if I am being attacked by an 85-year-old woman with a knife, okay, so this 85-year-old woman sees me and she gets pissed off at me and she's using a walker. And so she whips out a knife and she says, oh, you just stand there. I'm coming over, buddy, and I'm going to cut you to ribbons. And she starts advancing on me with her walker and her knife. And I go, oh no, she's coming at me with a knife. And I draw a gun and I shoot her. Every jury in the nation is going to put me away for murder for that.
Right.
Because again, why didn't you just back up, John? Why didn't you just walk away from her? Why didn't you just kick her walker out from under her? You know, you have so many other things that would have been better. Is she really a deadly threat? Whereas, for instance, if I have, and we see this pretty regular, you can imagine a woman being beaten by her ex, okay? And he's bigger than her, he's stronger than her, he's a male, so he's got elevated testosterone levels and she doesn't. So she's got all these disparities that him attacking her with his bare hands can kill her, or can put her in the hospital very easily. And so, you know, when we have those multiple disparities, and I usually tell folks that 2 factors of disparity is what I'd really like people to think about before they think about using deadly force against an unarmed person. That is safer legally than a single factor of disparity. So just, man, he's bigger than me. Okay. He's bigger than me, and I know that he is a world kickboxing champion and I'm not. All right, now I have 2 factors of disparity. He's highly trained and he's bigger than me. And of course, we always say too, you know, I tell folks, we talk about the difference between can I and should I and must I.
Right.
So I get people all the time say, can I shoot someone if? It's the wrong question to ask all the time. Because you might get away with it, but you also might end up enjoying life in a gated community at taxpayers' expense.
Right.
If instead I go, must I? Well, if I don't shoot this guy right now, he's going to put me in the hospital or kill me. I'm going to I'm going to die today. Or my child is going to be irreparably harmed if I don't kill him right now. So I must. Well, if you're in the must, you're probably going to be in an okay spot from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
You start delving into can, man, you got problems.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on so many great points there, but the must really is subjective, right? And you touched on the law there, and I want to read, what we look at when it comes to self-defense, defending military service members. The instructions, it basically has two parts. First, the accused must have had a reasonable belief that death or grievous bodily harm was about to be inflicted. And that's what you talked about, right? That you have to actually believe that you are about to be seriously hurt or killed to use, deadly force, right? But there's that second part when we get into the subjective aspect of it, which is, the accused must have actually believed that the amount of force that he used was required to protect against death or grievous bodily harm, right? And to determine that, you have to look at the situation through the eyes of the accused, right? And you touched on it, right? You have to look at things like, the intelligence of the accused, the age, the emotional control, obviously a background in martial arts, for you, right? If you were to be in this situation versus one of our clients, it would probably be a different analysis, right? So, it's interesting, evaluating that subjective test, because it's not just, if you believe that you were going to get hurt. It's looking at it through the eyes of the accused and what they are, sensing and feeling in that moment, right?
Yeah, well, and this is why I always say, self-defense cases are different than almost any other criminal case because, of course, under the Fifth Amendment, you do not have to testify in your own criminal trial. That's the Fifth Amendment protects you from participating in your own prosecution. But if you're going to fulfill that subjective aspect, were you actually at fear of death or great bodily harm? Did you earnestly believe that you were going to die or be put in a hospital? Did you feel like this was the only thing that I had in front of me, the only way that I could stop it? Well, really, the only person almost ever that can tell that to a jury is the defendant, is the person who is, had those experiences, which means you're going to have to testify and be exposed to cross-examination. You're just going to have to. I've only ever had one case where a defendant did not testify in their trial and we still got a self-defense instruction to the jury. And that was because he was on the phone with 911 when deadly force was used. And so the defense attorneys were able to establish his earnest fear of death from that 911 call, and then was able to get that instruction without him testifying. But very, very rare.
Absolutely. No, we 100% agree that, to really flush this out and help the jury understand, this situation through the eyes of the accused, they're likely going to have to get up there and testify. And that presents all sorts of risks in and of itself. So really prepping, the defendant to get up there and testify and tell their story, that could be everything, right? And I want to talk about, we'll speak in general terms, but, you have a situation where, two guys get into a bit of an argument at a bar. So now you have this face-off in the parking lot. And this guy continues to approach the defendant, right? Continues to escalate and say that he's going to, kick his ass and he's going to mess him up, blah, 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 right? Threatening him. The guy gets all the way around the car to now they are face to face, and the defendant hasn't moved. He's been standing next to his car door the entire time. This guy approaches the defendant, gives him a shove, and then starts swinging on him and makes contact with his fist. And so as that's happening, he knows this guy, and he knows he's got a background in fighting. He knows he's aggressive. He knows that he fights people at the barracks all the time, and that he oftentimes wins. So that is going through the mind of the defendant right there, right? And the defendant has a knife on him. So as he gets hit and as, he's put in this chokehold, right? He goes to stab. He stabs, 7 to 8 times in the guy's lower back. And that de-escalates the situation. The aggressor almost dies. So, what are your thoughts on that? At, all the training you've done, all the classes you've done, all the testimony you provided in court, right? When you're dealing with a situation like that, what are your thoughts there? What comes to your mind?
Did I hear you right that he pulled the knife out after the guy started choking him?
Yeah. So he basically, there's a shove, a punch, and then he gets him kind of down into almost like a guillotine, right? To where he's got him in a chokehold and the defendant is down around the aggressor's waist. And then that's when the defendant pulls the knife and it goes around the back and stabs, 7 to 8 times in the lower back.
I think that the presence of the choke makes that an objective, reasonable threat of death. I think that in today's world, I tell people all the time, okay, so I've done enough jujitsu. I'm a white belt. Don't get me wrong. I'm nobody, but done, a year and a half of the snuggle struggles and the South American floor karate, as we say. And any application of a submission is considered a use of deadly force. It's highly likely to cause death or great bodily injury. A choke can easily kill. And in a non-consensual environment, we've seen that again and again here in the U.S. Many law enforcement agencies now ban them. I don't think that's the best idea. If you use one, there's a case in New York that a guy who used the choke on an aggressor and was subsequently charged in a significant manner with aggravated assault for that. And so a choke is considered an imminent risk of death or great bodily injury.
Right.
And therefore would justify the use of deadly force to stop it.
What about if you remove the choke? What if it was just the hitting with the fist, right, towards the head?
I think it would be a struggle. I think you're going to struggle to justify the use of deadly force at a single disparity like that. I think you can make a case. I mean, obviously you're going to make some kind of case, right? You're going to want to say, hey, I think this was reasonable, and we've seen in cases, there was a case in Las Vegas and another case in New York, actually, I believe it was the Bronx, that, in the case in the Bronx, he was a little bit older and a guy grabbed him, pushed him really hard, and then grabbed a hold of him and started taking him somewhere else. He stabbed him several times. He was originally charged with murder for that. The guy died. And then those charges were dropped because of political pressure. Another one out of Las Vegas of a smoke shop robbery that the clerk, guy jumped the counter and started stealing stuff off of the counter. The clerk stabbed him several times and the district attorney didn't charge him. I was surprised in that one. I thought that maybe he would have been charged in that one. So without that factor, you go, okay, wait a minute. I know this guy fights a lot and I don't fight a lot. That's a single disparity. Now, again, he's really good at fighting. If I could establish additionally, he's much bigger than me. He's much stronger than me, something like that. He's got buddies around, and I'm worried his buddies are gonna kill me. Gonna jump in and kill me because they're all looming around me. Then maybe then those disparities go up. But I've said this before, man. Listen, I'd rather take a butt kicking than face murder charges. Yeah, and sometimes you go, hey, wait a minute, this is a physical conflict. The guys, threw a punch at me and I'm going to end up taking an ass whipping and I don't want to. I had a couple of those in high school and I was in enough fights to go, this is dumb and I don't want to do this anymore. But, sometimes you just got to say, hey, not every threat is a deadly threat. And he said, well, wait a minute, then do I have to wait until he's pounded my head into the pavement before I pull my knife and stab him? Well, quite frankly, yes, because again, until I can establish reasonably that I am truly and objectively at risk of death or great bodily injury, then no, I can't use deadly force to stop that because that escalates the conflict. So in those cases where you first said the presence of the choke makes that to me a very reasonable use of deadly force to stop it. Not necessarily the greatest use of a knife I've ever heard from a tactical perspective, but hey,
right.
Effective nonetheless.
You've been incredibly gracious with your time. We're coming to the end of the episode now, and I've got a question that I want to ask you about your faith. So you specialize in force. You're a trained guy. I get a lot of folks that come to me at times. I'm a devout follower of Jesus Christ, and I have folks that ask me all the time, how can you both follow Jesus and defend people who do really bad things? And so I was curious, when I was learning about you to learn about your faith, and I want to ask you a similar question. How do you reconcile this idea that you specialize in force with also this, devout belief you have in the gospel and in who Jesus Christ is?
Yeah, I mean, so the whole premise of my life is I just want to hear "well done, good and faithful servant" at the end. Okay, so I'm a Jesus guy, and I want him happy with me, and I want to live my life like he would live my life if he was me. I don't believe that Jesus was a pacifist. I think, I don't want, it would take a long while to explain, but if you see him in the Gospel of John cleansing the temple,
that's right.
He makes a whip of cords and cleanses the temple. That was a threat of violence. Okay. So whether or not he actually was violent on anyone, he threatened violence on them to get them out of him. And, To say otherwise is simply just obstreperous, in my opinion. I mean, so I think there is a time and place. I think that Scripture does say that we should be very careful with human life. Humans are inestimably valuable and of infinite worth and dignity. And I believe that fully. And this is why I am very reticent to use deadly force, and we only use deadly force as a last resort.
I think
there are times for that.
I think that's so well said. And from my perspective, when I was young and I was growing up and I was taught about Jesus, it was all the dove, right? A very peaceful man, which he was. But we also forget that Jesus Christ was in his own right a revolutionary in some ways. Certainly what he was teaching about the kingdom of God coming to the earth was revolutionary at that time. And he was also a man who stood up for himself and what he believed in, to the point that he was put on the cross, which was the most humiliating way that the Romans could put anybody to death. And we forget that he was, in fact, a warrior. And I think that, hearing your answer kind of speaks to that too, about who he really was.
Well, and so I think the Apostle Paul expounds on it a little bit too. Romans 12, he talks about, if possible, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with all people. Okay. So I tell people I'm a man of peace. Okay. Why? Because that shalom, that peace is the bringing again of God's kingdom to earth. And I want to bring as much of God's presence into my world as I possibly can. And since Jesus is the Prince of Peace, I want to bring peace. But sometimes, again, if possible, as much as it depends on you, be at peace with all people. So it doesn't always depend on me. And I can't control that in its ultimate outcomes. And so I always say we use force as a shield, not a sword. We don't use it punitively. We use it protectively. And all we're really doing here is we are defending healthy boundaries. And my healthy boundary is I also am built in the image of God, of inestimable worth and value and dignity, and no one has the right to take that from me. And so for me to say, my boundary is no one has the right to take my life, no one has the right to harm me, and therefore I have a right to defend that boundary, and I will appropriately within the bounds of I'm a person of peace. So if I can get out of a situation with a wave and my bad, I'm so sorry, or hey man, let me buy you a beer. I'm so sorry that, I bumped into you here at the concert. Let me buy you and your girl a beer and say I'm sorry. Great. I would so much rather do that. If I have to use force, use my hand, somebody gets out of hand and wants to throw a punch at me or something like that, I want to stop them, and I have the right to stop them. Somebody threatens my life, I have the right to stop that. And some folks that are Christians, they say, yeah, but John, you caused their death and now they can't respond to Jesus anymore. So how do you feel about that? I didn't cause nothing. They caused it. Their actions were the cause of their demise. And so they're responsible for their actions. I'm responsible for mine. I defended a healthy and appropriate boundary that they, through their immorality and their sin, was trying to violate. And so they're responsible for their outcomes, not me.
I'm going to turn it over to Matt here to close us out, but I do want to say one thing about Paul, one thing that's clear in the Pauline letters. That was not a man who was afraid of conflict, was he?
No, he definitely was willing to get in there and have the hard conversations, that's for sure.
Hey, John, we're wrapping up the show. Again, appreciate all the time that you've spent with us, and I know our listeners are going to love it. I have one very quick question, and then I don't think I need to tell people how to find you because they can do so very easily. But if you've got one more minute, I'd just like to know, I know that you have the annual active self-protection, conference and training. Mm-hmm. I think you do that every September. And you donate the proceeds, I believe, or at least a large part of the proceeds, to the Flint Hills Foster Teen Camp. And I guess my question is, I don't think I've ever heard why you've chosen that charity or that cause. And I guess I'd love to hear just, take a couple of minutes to tell us why you've chosen to support them, and then we'll close the show up.
Yeah, they're not the only charity we support, but yeah, so in order to come to the Ask National Conference, you don't actually pay me a nickel. You make a donation to the Flint Hills Foster Teen Camp, and then that donation allows you to come to the conference. So it's 100% a fundraiser. The conference costs me around $8,000 to $10,000 a year to put on, which I guess I'm the only national level firearms trainer that is that stupid. But it's a great cause, and we're glad to be a part of it because they give abused and abandoned foster teens hope and help those kids to make it when they really have no hope. About 60% of foster teens on their 18th birthday are homeless.
Yeah.
And just thrust out into the world. And so we met the directors at the time. We had actually done a firearms training class on their facility, met the directors, and fell in love with that mission. And so that idea of, man, we're just trying to bring help to kids who have no hope. Now, slightly different circumstances, whatever. I am the child of adoption. My dad adopted me when I was 8. He married my mom when I was 6. Our CEO, Stephanie Widener, and our CMO, Neil Widener, they have a child who they adopted. Their son, Cody, came to them when he was just a baby. So adoption runs in their veins as well. And so those kids who've been abused, those kids who've been abandoned, who don't have any hope, we just thought, man, we got to help here in some capacity. And so they have a beautiful facility out there in Manhattan, Kansas, just north of Manhattan. They have ranges out there and classrooms, and it's just a really wonderful facility. And so we thought, hey, the best way we can help is to maybe do our conference there. And, last year, obviously we're coming up again this year. It's only like 6 weeks away, first weekend in September this year. But last year we raised around $120,000 for them. So, between people's registration coming, and we do an auction, and we do a raffle, and we do all kinds of stuff like that. And they're not the only ministry that we support, but it's just such incredible work. And now they've had some leadership change. It's all volunteer organization. So literally every penny goes to the kids, to help the kids. And I just think it's such an important thing that these kids in our midst, we wonder why there's such mental health struggles in our country. We wonder why aren't kids making it these days? And yet, what are we doing to help them? What are we doing to uplift them? And these are kind of the worst of the outcasts, the last and the least and the lost. And, it goes back to a faith commitment. Pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this: to visit widows and orphans in their distress. And these kids are orphans. They're we don't call them that. We call them foster kids, but they're orphans. That's what their definitional is. And so if we're unwilling to help orphans, what does that say about our characters? So we support them. We support another ministry called SWAT Ministries. They rescue underage kids from sex slavery all over the world. That's another one that AFTIS is kind of big on. So we're just trying to do good in our world, and grateful to be a small part.
Well, God bless you for doing that. I'm sure they're very grateful. I don't think there's any higher calling than to help our youth, and we try to do a little bit of that here and do our part as well. But God bless you for doing that work, and thank you so much. Anybody who wants to reach you, it's really easy to do. It's Active Self-Protection or ASP, and you're all over the place. So I could give the website, the YouTube channels, but they won't have any problem.
The first page of Google will tell you where I'm at.
That's right. That's right. And we're very grateful. It was a great episode. Our listeners will love it. Hopefully some of your listeners will tune in as well, but really appreciate it. Would love to have you back at some point too, if you can budget the time. But John, thank you so much. You're a friend of the show.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. We appreciate it, man.
Thanks, John.
All right, and all our listeners who tuned in to this episode, thank you very much. Be well, stay safe, and we'll see you next time on the Military Justice Today podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Military Justice Today podcast with your hosts, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams. This show was made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. For more information or to listen to more episodes, visit militaryjusticetoday.com.